Hello, happy Wednesday. I'm on the floor for this one because I just felt like being on the floor. I'm in my living room and there's no bookcase in my living room, so I hope my records will suffice. They're kind of like just really tall, really thin books. Did I already say happy Wednesday? Happy Wednesday. Last week I did like a reading vlog style real-time review slash discussion about They Both Die at the End, and I talked about death and death culture and just things that the book made me think about, because it's like a book about death culture that wasn't supposed to be about death culture, but kind of really is about death culture a little bit. And I got a lot of people that were super interested in that part of the discussion, which is great because that's like the whole video, and if no one was interested in that, that would mean the whole video was just bad. Like I said in the video, like people don't really think about death until they absolutely have to, and that's a problem because it just fulfills this cycle of misinformation. And if you're wondering like, well, what does she know? I've done my fair share of talking to funeral directors and death professionals, and I'm pretty well read on the subject, and I got my crematory operator certification a couple years ago, and I have the textbook to prove it. I'd show you the actual certification, but it has my birth name on it. Yeah, like I have this. I actually don't know if I'm like not supposed to talk about the seminar or whatever. I don't know why you wouldn't be able to talk about the seminar, but like funeral directors are weirdly secretive about what they do. And I think I don't want to like demonize them because it's not their fault. It kind of is their fault a little bit, but I feel like it's a sketchy business because the public being informed about death threatens their business. That's like, ugh. But they genuinely think they're in it to help people, and like, you know, people don't know that they don't need it. People don't know that they might not want it. I've talked to a lot of people who didn't realize that home funerals even existed. Like, it just wasn't a thought in their mind. And when I told them about it, they were like, I wish I had known, because I would have loved to have done that. So I have 6 books here, all about death, to recommend to you. 5 of them are nonfiction, only 1 of them is fiction. I know. The first one is Stiff by Mary Roach. So I've talked about Mary Roach before on this channel. Like, I can't shut up about Mary Roach. Like, I love her so much. She's like my chaos mom. Like, she's just so cool. I watched an interview with her recently with Adam Savage, and it was like everything that she does is what I wish I could do. So this book basically just talks about what happens to corpses after they're donated to science, and the many like practical uses that there are for human cadavers. Like, medical schools really need them to practice like surgery. Like, when you think about it, people have to learn how to like give surgery on humans, and like I imagine that operating on an actual like dead person is like so important. But Mary Roach is like really funny, and she's just so, you can tell she's like genuinely so curious, and it's so fun to read like her thought process, and the things that she thinks of is stuff that I wouldn't have ever thought to ask. This next book is Grave Matters by Mark Harris, and I think in one of my videos I did a tag video where a question was like, a book you think everyone should read, and this is the book that I said, because it's filled with information that I really genuinely think everyone should know. It walks you through every single type of like burial or death care, from least environmentally friendly to most environmentally friendly, and it's so good, and it's so important to know this stuff, I think. Like, one time I said that embalming isn't necessary, and someone got personally offended by that, and they weren't like an embalmer, like they weren't a mortician. It was just someone who was like, well, I thought that's just what we did to honor the people that we love when we die, but okay. And it just goes to show like they have no idea what embalming is. And I think that's sort of the insidious thing that the funeral industry has done, which is it's made people conflate useless, over-the-top things that they can offer for money with things that show that you loved this person. But there's a really touching account of a green funeral in here where it's just like a pine box and they're being buried in this cemetery that's a green cemetery, so it's just like a forest. Like, if you don't read anything else about death, read this. And the next book that I'm gonna recommend is Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Lessons from the Crematory by Caitlin Doty. But Caitlin Doty is a YouTuber, and she has a channel called Ask a Mortician, which is really, really good, and I highly recommend that you check that out if you're interested in this conversation at all. This book is basically her memoir of working in a crematory for the first time when she was like 23, I think. It's really good. Her sense of humor is really good too. It's been a couple years since I've read this now, but it's a good one. Like, I remember really enjoying it. And since it's a memoir, I think this would be one that's like easier to read if you don't really like nonfiction. And if I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure she touches on like the denial of death in this book and the way that our culture deals with death and how she kind of came to realize that herself working in a funeral home. It also details kind of what cremation is, because I think that's something that a lot of people don't know. Grave Matters talks about it too, but it's in here too. This is another fun book. It's Rest in Pieces by Bess Lovejoy. It basically just talks about what happened to famous people's corpses, because sometimes when you're buried, and you're also famous, you don't get to stay buried. And this book isn't like informational in the ways that the other ones that I've been recommending are, where they deal with like culture and the funeral industry. This is kind of just like fun history, but like it's still good. The next one that I'm gonna recommend is The Puritan Way of Death by David E. Stannard. And this is more of like a cultural, historic or historical? I can never remember what the difference is between them. But it's basically a study about the way that Puritans dealt with death and how their death culture kind of led to our death culture. And it's really interesting how weirdly similar it is, and how there were a lot of ways that Puritans were ahead of us. There were a lot of ways where they were like not ahead of us at all, but like they didn't believe in embalming. Like, they believed that embalming was just superstitious. What I really liked about this book was that it went into kind of the emotional implications of dealing with death the way that they did. Like, there is something called deathbed anxiety, where people would go their whole lives saying like, oh, I don't fear death. And then there's just like the buildup of it all over your whole entire life. And then suddenly you're dying and you're just panicking and having the worst time. And because, you know, Puritans also believed in like predestination, which is just like a whole other level to it that made it bad. So this is just like an interesting insight into the history of death culture in our country. But this book is so cool. Like, there's a lot of interesting like poetry and songs from Puritan times about death. But the book actually starts in ancient Egypt, I think. And it walks you through kind of before Puritans, like what led to Puritans. And then I think it goes all the way into sort of the 1800s, I think. So you get like a pretty good amount of like historic death culture. So this is the last nonfiction book that I'm going to recommend, and it's The American Way of Death by Jessica Mitford. And I feel weird recommending it because I haven't finished it, and I feel like it's a little bit disingenuous to be recommending a book that you haven't read all the way through. However, this is like a really respected study of American death culture and American funerals, and I feel like it would be weird if it wasn't on this list. It was written, I think, originally in the 60s and then revised in the 90s. It's a good, objective look at the funeral industry in America, and like I said, I feel like it would be weird if this wasn't on this list. And the last book that I'm going to recommend is the only fiction on this list, and it's Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. And while this isn't like super informational as far as death goes, it shows like a lot of aspects of death culture that have kind of been lost to time. Like, so this book is about Willie Lincoln, who is Abraham Lincoln's son, who died of yellow fever. And so the book is about like Willie Lincoln dying and then meeting all of the people in the cemetery who were also dead. The things that stick out to this book to me and make it worth being on a list of books about death is just the way that grieving is portrayed in this. It's like not something that people talk about, just actual like physical interaction with someone's corpse, where there's like scenes in this book where Abraham Lincoln is like actually holding his son's body after he's like already been interred. Like, he just goes into the mausoleum and takes the casket out and opens it and just holds him. And that's like really powerful. And I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that and grieving in that way, but people have made it so weird. And I don't think that's right. I think that's an incredibly healthy thing to do. It's a good way to get closure. And I think that just being depicted in here makes it worth being on a list of books about death. Because if your like knee-jerk reaction to that kind of thing is, oh, that's so unhealthy, or you shouldn't do that, or like, that's gross, or just that's incredibly morbid, I think seeing it in context, like in fiction, is really good. But yeah, I think there's like valuable things in this. The writing is like in a really weird experimental kind of style. I really liked it a lot, actually, but I could see why it would bother some people. I could see why people wouldn't like it, but I think it's worth a shot. Yeah, so these are all of my deathy book recommendations. If you're gonna read any of these, let me know which ones pique your interest. If you've read any of these already, by any chance, I'd love to know what you thought of them. And I think that's it. This coffee's really cold now. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed watching. I hope maybe you learned something. I hope you have a good day, and I'll see you next week.